Okay, so we looked at Immanuel Kant and a deontological ethic. Now let's take a look at consequentialism. Consequentialism is an ethic that says that you can evaluate an action based on its consequences or its results. And so when you're looking at an action, you try to figure out what's going to happen. You make an educated guess, and if the amount of pleasure that the action is going to produce is greater than the amount of pain that the action is going to produce, then that action is likely morally okay. This particular idea comes to us initially from the philosopher Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham, who incidentally, fun fact, his body is now under glass in a philosophical society in Britain, was the teacher of the philosopher John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill wrote a book called Utilitarianism, and this book gives us some of the classical formulations of this particular idea. Utilitarianism is the belief that you can evaluate an action by subtracting the amount of pain from the amount of pleasure that the action causes, and that if you produce a greater amount of pleasure than pain, then the action is morally okay. This idea is called the law of utility. Now, this cartoon kind of summarizes the idea for us. Happiness is intended pleasure and the absence of pain. Unhappiness is pain and the privation or the absence of pleasure, and the greatest happiness principle is that the actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness and wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. So what does this mean for us? Well, if we go back to the trolley problem, in the trolley problem it would be a relatively easy situation for us to answer. The action that is correct in this problem is to do whatever you need to do in order to save the lives of those 5 people. So if you need to pull the switch, killing the 1 and saving the lives of the 5, then that's morally okay. If you need to push the fat man off the bridge, that's morally okay as well. Now the question, the real kind of kink comes in here when we start to include our own moral biases. So what happens in the version of the trolley problem where your grandmother happens to be on the other side of the track? Well, for this issue, Mill gives us the idea of the benevolent spectator. He says that you need to make sure that when you're doing this action, you're not doing what's good for you or what produces pleasure for you. You need to do what produces pleasure for mankind as a whole. Basically, the greatest amount of pleasure overall, not just the greatest amount of pleasure for you. Producing the greatest amount of pleasure for you, incidentally, is something we call ethical egoism, where Mill was trying to say that this would be a much more moral thing to do, to create a greater overall pleasure, even if it means your own sacrifice. So consequentialism, you need to think about the ends of the action, the consequences of the action, and evaluate those consequences before performing the action. Now, what are the problems with consequentialism? Well, one is that consequentialism can lead us to do some pretty nasty things in the pursuit of the greater good. You can think of all kinds of examples probably on your own. The other problem is that we tend to not have a very good idea of what the consequences of our actions are. And so, how exactly can we evaluate them? If I can only see them hazily, can I really say that one action is going to be better than another? So that's consequentialism in a nutshell. We'll look at the pitfalls for both of these moral theories in the next video.